Need a bigger town hall.
All right, shall we get going again, everyone? I think our break is unfortunately over. We are going to get going. All right, so Stacy, you ready? All right, turning it over to you.
Good. Welcome back, everyone. So we got to make up for lost time. Sia is here to talk about adaptive management. You all got her draft text and the updated Gantt chart. The Gantt chart isn't all that much different from the one you had gotten last time, but we just figured we might as well make sure, even if there's little changes, you've got the one that is referred to in the plan that you got as well. So, Sia.
Hi, everybody. What I sent to you folks, what we sent, is truly intended to be a working document. And so it said draft on it, but I want to reiterate that what we're trying to do is work together on creating an adaptive management plan. It's very custom to Orleans. I'm going to go through a little bit about a process that you've heard about, and why we put a graphic in the document was to give a visual overview, if you will, of what we're talking about when we talk about the process. And so what we've been trying to do is, and I'm going to talk about these elements, and what we're going to need is specifics back. I've tried to, and Mike's tried to, and the whole team has tried to document the actual specifics for Orleans. And part of what we've given you are documents that you should read and tell us, oh, you missed this specific goal and objective. We need a different uncertainty. This is a part of the plan that's not been appropriately documented in your adaptive management plan. But just by way of overview, I'm going to talk through these elements. Defining the goals and objectives. You know, we've got to understand why we're doing this. Water quality improvements, cost effectiveness, all of those things. And from those goals and objectives, we have uncertainties that we went through a whole S-curve. And this, in some ways, is sort of walking us through what we've been doing here for the past 11 meetings. We've got uncertainties. From those uncertainties, we've tried to plan and design a real plan to really clean up Orleans waters and meet regulatory standards using a mix of traditional and non-traditional technologies. So we have a goal of cleaning up water and restoring ecosystems functions, and then we know that we don't know everything we'd love to know to get the perfect answer. But then we want to plan and design anyway, because we have to move forward with implementation. And there are also uncertainties in how much septage and what growth is going to be over the next 20 years and all those things. But we're going to plan anyway, and we're going to implement that plan in phases so that we can learn from what we've done. That there's probably, I think we all can recognize something needs to be done. There was a picture I put on a slide about 6 months ago that was one of the monitoring station. Judy Scanlon had taken a picture of algae all around a monitoring station in, I think it was in Lower River. And that, to me, that picture sort of says it all. There's algae blooms. There's degraded water quality. There's habitat degradation. So we know we need to do something. And so if we implement in phases and learn by monitoring and watching, and then taking that monitoring information and evaluating, we will be able to adjust. And that's sort of the essence of adaptive management. This is absolutely the 30,000-foot view, but if we keep it in mind, I think as we get into the details of the plan, we can refine what I've given you to make it more detail specific and incorporate all the feedbacks that need to get in there. So you've seen the plan, and I wanted to sort of tell you what I think about how to move it forward to be the plan that is right for Orleans. We have a lot of different goals here. And they're multifaceted, and then sometimes they're in conflict. If we didn't have any financial constraints, it would be much easier to make a plan that was easy. But we've got financial issues, we've got cost issues that feed into the financial issues, and we've got levels of uncertainty and levels of risk, both in the baseline conditions that we're planning for and how the technologies actually perform. So what we're trying to do is take this adaptive management process, which is pretty well known. I mean, it's been applied in a lot of different ways, but we're trying to take a fairly standard process, adaptive management, and customize it, and I'm starting to sound like Mike, customize and tailor it to Orleans, because that's why we're here. We're here not to give you a plan that you could pull off the internet and fill in the blanks for. We're trying to give you a plan that speaks to the specific complex program that you've seen in that Gantt chart and how we're going to make it work. You know the complexities there. The baseline water quality assumptions are at a level of uncertainty, so we have to figure out how to deal with that. We have to deal with all these new technologies that nobody's an expert in because they haven't really been applied this way anywhere before. And then we've got financial assumptions, and Mike just showed you how complex that can get. I want to emphasize that, so I've been working in Falmouth. I was thinking about this over the past few weeks. I've been working in Falmouth for 3 years. And the town of Falmouth hired me as their technical consultant to oversee every demonstration project that they're doing. And we've implemented 3. We've implemented shellfish demonstration, eco-toilet demonstration, an innovative alternative septic demonstration project. We're working on a permeable reactive barrier demonstration project, and we're doing a sewer project. So I've been involved intimately with a group of stakeholders called the Water Quality Management Committee. And we have been very effective at writing comprehensive wastewater management plans, at writing documents that go to town meeting and get approved, at working with regulators to get adaptive management plans done. And that process has worked really well because we work collaboratively. So I'll come up with a framework for something. We've got additional consultants that feed into that process. And then you guys, the equivalent, the Water Quality Committee, gives specific input back to what I give to them. And then the documents get better, the Gantt charts get better, the planning approach gets better. So the insights actually have worked very well in Falmouth. So I think it would make the whole process better to continue to get your feedback. And the other 2 points are the timing of the Gantt chart, which I'm going to go through in pretty excruciating detail, is going to get updated after town meeting. So we've made, this group has tried to add a timeline, a start time and a finish time for projects based on our best understanding. But those start dates, how long it takes to permit a PRB, how long it takes to get contracts signed so that we can buy equipment to install shellfish, those are going to change, and so we want to continually update them. And I guess the last point is that we are not, in this adaptive plan, developing a scope of work. It is the step before what I would call the scope of work. And I've written a number of scopes of work to implement the demonstrations in Falmouth. So I think it's very important for us to recognize what we're trying to do is put together the wiring diagram, and then the specific elements have yet another level of detail, and what I call that is the scopes of work. So with that, I'm not going to repeat this, but I've given you an outline of the things that I believe, working with Stantec and their group, and working with Mike and working with Stacy, these are the elements that ought to be in the adaptive management plan. Again, there may be other points. I don't think so, but there may be. And so that's where your perspective on it would be very helpful. And so what I gave you was an example. What you had was Town Cove. Obviously, there are over 13 sub-watersheds in the town of Orleans, and each one of them is going to need a Gantt chart and a list of specific elements in the adaptive management plan. But I think getting the structure right first makes a lot of sense. So we're not going to iterate a structure for every single sub-watershed till we've come to some sort of a consensus on what it ought to look like. And that's why I did Town Cove first, so that you could see what it looks like and feed back what's missing or what isn't. So I've come up with you've heard of O&M. Everybody here has heard of O&M. It means operation and maintenance. So I've coined a new one. You heard it here first. It's R and U, risks and uncertainties. I couldn't keep writing it, but R and U, you heard it here first, and I'm sure over the years of adaptive management, R and U is going to be just as common as O&M, because that's what this is really all about, is managing that. this is what we've come up with from your feedback and from our understanding, the priority list of risks and uncertainties for Town Cove. We have water quality questions with the altered inlet location and the monitoring that's been done and needing to be updated because the MEP reports are 10 years old plus at this point. We've got what are the nitrogen removal requirements going to be? We've come to a consensus that we're going to use the MEP target numbers and get the mass reduction based on the current load and the threshold load. We've had that conversation. That's what we've agreed on. But we've also agreed we're not sure that's exactly right. And so what we want to make sure we do early on in this process, and you'll see it in the Gantt chart, it's one of the first action items, is review the nitrogen removal requirements, understand the MEP reports, rerun the models, understand what different the inlet location has done to that, and use that information to guide future planning. So those are water quality uncertainties. We've got uncertainties with performance of our non-traditional technologies, as we've talked about over several meetings. We also don't know, we've assumed 25% fertilizer reduction, but we need to make sure that that's an accurate assumption. And then we've got stormwater projects that are in process and being implemented, and we want to make sure that we've incorporated the right number for nitrogen removal in that. So a number of risks and uncertainties that we have to plan for. So how are we going to do that? Go ahead.
There's also risks and uncertainties, as I pointed out in the last meeting, with the traditional portion of this.
That's a very good point, and they are actually incorporated. I should have put that on the slide. Yep, there are risks and uncertainties with the traditional technologies. And when we get to the capital projects, I do actually have trigger and decision points for the traditionals. We're evaluating cost, we're evaluating performance. So you're absolutely right, and I should make sure that that gets into this part of the Gantt chart. Absolutely. And if I could edit on the fly, I would. So we've got uncertainty resolution action items. And so how I'm going to do this presentation is I'm going to talk through the first column of the Gantt chart so that we can talk about the elements. Because this thing is, we got to build this Gantt chart. And the first way we're going to build it is understand what elements I've included. And if I've missed some, like maybe we need to put monitor and evaluate traditional technologies as another specific item. And then we're going to talk about the timeline for taking care of dealing with all of these items. And then finally, we're going to put some arrows to show how one item feeds into the next. So this is what we've got for uncertainty. We're going to monitor the water quality. We're going to survey the ecosystem, the INFAUNA, it's called an INFAUNA survey, in that Nauset Harbor watershed. And then we're going to update the data for the MEP. We're going to update the water quality data that we have and do a rerun of the MEP model. That's the plan right now, to take new data and information and rerun it and try to get a more up-to-date water quality, nitrogen mass understanding. And then the fertilizer and the non-traditional technologies we just talked about. I see you guys have some thoughts about the monitoring.
Yes, I do. Mark Fiegel, I'm sitting in for Paul Ammett.
Great.
Monitor water quality and survey and fauna ecosystems and stuff. And I see that, and those are nice words, but I'm concerned about what's underneath it.
Okay.
What are the plans to do this? You know, what is the monitoring design? What statistical applications and methods are you going to be using? And a bunch of other stuff. There is a document that EPA put out called the Coastal Zone Act Reauthorization. And I think Section 2 talks about techniques for assessing water quality and for estimating pollution loads. And they do a fairly nice job of going through that. And the one thing that they put in there as a cautionary note, they say, and this is EPA words, a qualified statistician should be consulted to review proposed monitoring design, the plan for statistical analysis, the application of statistical techniques, and the interpretation of analytical results. And what I would like to see is somehow that wording, those concepts, be placed into the adaptive management plan. Otherwise, I think it just kind of flows out.
I'm going to take some notes. I think that's a really valuable suggestion. And part of where I see that fitting is actually in the scope of work phase. And so I'm just going to skip ahead.
Well, the thing too is that, like, I do have a little bit of background in statistics. But I know that what you would use for the PRBs would be completely different than what you would use for the floating wetland constructions. And the frequency and the amount of sampling you do is going to be completely different. So
Right. Well, I'll share. Go ahead and I'll.
Yes, when we start talking about monitoring, we also have to make sure that we start talking about monitoring all of the watersheds. If we're going to take a look at Falmouth's, anything that you do in Falmouth that is an advantage, our monitoring has to match your monitoring. So we have to have apples to apples.
Sure.
Okay. And I think that on Cape Cod, we need to be able to share data so that we're not all trying to reinvent the wheel.
I think that's a good point.
We can save a lot of money doing that.
And this will true. Monitoring is going to be in every subwatershed.
I understand that. And another thing is, I'm fine down, as long as we have a good monitoring procedure in place, I'm fine until we get down to the last two. And when we start getting down to the last two, I think, how are you going to be able to tell the difference between a demo for the PRB in Town Cove and the oysters in Town Cove? In other words, and the fertilizer in Town Cove? Where did the reduction come from? So I think you have to isolate your tests.
Are you saying that I shouldn't have more than one variable in my experiment?
Yes.
Well, you know, I'm going to speak to mine.
I'm just looking at this, and I'm sure you're not, and the labels here are that you've got 2 in this one and 2 in the next one.
And they don't all come at the same time. And
right.
Yes.
We have to be able to isolate so we know
and
what works and what
PRBs,
doesn't.
you're not measuring the water quality. You're actually measuring upstream and downstream and the groundwater.
I understand.
So you measure the groundwater if you're doing in-stream. I just spent the past 5 days, and I'm not even going to tell you how many hours, reviewing the second year of the Little Pond demonstration project. That it's a shellfish demonstration project that I actually manage, and we have done 3 years of it, and we're doing the next year coming this summer. So I've planned the last installation from the demo project. The first year we did a viability test, and we monitored and we measured. So SMAST has been doing that monitoring. We actually designed the monitoring plan with a statistician, and we have upstream, in-stream, and downstream sampling stations. We have a certain number of sampling events every third day. We have in situ, they call them moorings, I call them zones. The point of that is to say, I have actually developed a monitoring plan. And the really exciting, this is sort of hot off the presses information, we're starting to see an oyster effect, even though they've only grown the first year. So we've been, after this 3 years of data, been able to see water changes. And the answer is very simple. It's water clarity and reduction in chlorophyll, and then the commensurate reduction in the dissolved organic nitrogen, because that's the algae part. But we've seen it, and we've seen it because we've gotten to create a monitoring plan that was, in conjunction with the DEP, in fact, a great monitoring plan that gave us enough data points and enough data stations to actually see what we were looking for. So it's that kind of careful planning. But we didn't do that when we were writing our adaptive management plan for the south coast of Falmouth. We did that as a scope of work. That is what I wanted to go to ahead and say that in this Gantt chart that I'm going to pull up actually as an Excel so we can actually read it, but you have it in front of you. If you look in the monitoring, what you'll see, or in these in the capital projects, we've got planning and we've got design, and we've got the same thing for the monitoring. And what we want to do, and maybe I haven't expressed it as clearly as it's in my head, and that's what I want feedback on. This, if I need to make this more clear, I'm happy to do it. In my head, the design of the demonstration is all about designing the monitoring program, as well as designing the physical implementation of the shellfish or the PRB or the floating constructed wetlands.
And I just want to say, for where we are now, we don't have that all done,
No.
right? That's not where we are. But I think, again, if we think about the level of principles of what are the components of that plan, what's the process that'll be used to create that plan, any of those type of principles, I think, are fine to discuss. But we're not at this phase where we're actually creating and tweaking the plan itself.
We're not writing the scope of work in the adaptive management plan, and I guess I'd like to throw that out as a principle, is that we are going to do a scope of work for a monitoring plan that's going to be rigorous and detailed and statistically significant so we can actually get meaningful information that's not knowledge, just data. We want knowledge, we don't need data. But for the adaptive management plan, we want to make sure that we've named that we need to do that work, not actually write the scope of work in the plan.
Well, and to the extent we need to name how we're going to do that work or principles on which we
Okay.
agree about that work, let's do that too.
About that work. That term, about that work. Are we talking about the 30-year plan, or are we talking about just the demonstration? If we're talking, are we talking about that work? Is that the demonstration we're talking about?
About each element on that Gantt chart, there's work that needs to be done for each specific item. So here, what we want to talk about is how are we going to do the work to monitor water quality, and we got some good feedback. We want to make sure that's
Demonstration.
yeah, that's a demonstration.
Demonstration, right, okay.
Well, the monitoring the water quality is not a demonstration. It's an uncertainty. It's the overall water quality. Then we're going to monitor the water quality because of a demonstration, and that's different. So there's lots of monitoring. So,
Yeah, just to be another voice in support of where Mark was going, I've worked in terms of energy industry on evaluation. And before we dive into the monitoring plans, I think, and you want to really pick up Mark's words, you really want to build in the development of the evaluation methodology. I think that's really what Mark was going to. I do think in your document, that's a two-part process.
That's a
You
good point.
do the
And-
methodology first, then you know what your parameters are that meet the statistical requirements, then you go into the plan that says in each of these. And once you get one done, particularly on the non-traditionals, it should be easier. But you really want to get that methodology set.
That's a very good point. You have to start where you're going
Right.
and work backwards. You can't start at the monitoring. You have to figure out where you're going and why you need the data.
Well, and I appreciate the progressive nature of what SIA is presenting to us today. And I get the difference between the planning and the scope of work. There is a segment of the audience, not necessarily in this room today, that is just going to look at this in dollars and cents. And it is relatively easy to come up with the dollars and cents of the non-traditional technologies themselves. The hard part is coming up with the dollars and cents of monitoring and proving that what the outcome of those efforts is. And even in the pilot stage, we're going to know, A, we're going to need to know two things. A, what's it going to cost, even if someone else is writing the check, what's it going to cost to do a pilot on a non-traditional technology? And we are going to also have to incorporate the cost of monitoring. So we really need to get down that rabbit hole at some point in the not-too-distant future.
I'm not sure this is appropriate place for this, SIA, but in our draft agreement, we talk about that in addition to nitrogen control, nitrogen reduction, the plan seeks to control phosphorus impacts on freshwater systems. And Boland Pond, which we've talked a lot about, is part of Town Cove watershed. So, and in the pond studies that have been going on in all of our towns, we have many, many years of uninterpreted data. We have the numbers, but we don't know what they mean. And so a way to, we're working ourselves, but it would be good to have a way to correlate, as Jim said, across towns, the kinds of data and the same the kinds of data, what are we studying and how are we reporting it? And I think we need help from somebody on that. But also to interpret the data so that we understand it, that we have not had in Orleans for quite a few years, and in Eastham for several.
Just very quickly, last October, town meeting appropriated 2 pieces of money. One to update the most detailed fertilizer study on Cape Cod that was done 10 years ago. SIA has to put together the protocols for doing that. And we also appropriated money to develop the protocol for testing the effectiveness of our 25 acres of aquaculture grants in Little Pleasant Bay. And I know that SIA has been working on that, but she's been a little more involved in other things. But the idea is the town meeting has already said, here is the money, develop the protocol so we can understand how we monitor what is already there.
Jim, do you still have? Jim?
Yeah, to the issue of the data, where is all the data?
Carolyn is basically the keeper of it for Orleans. I'm the keeper of it for Eastham, and in Eastham it's gone on the town website. I don't know about in Orleans.
Well, we worked with, downstairs with the IT department in Orleans 5-6 years ago and set up a database, and we put all the data in, we had all the data incorporated for the saltwater systems into that. So and I don't know whether that's been maintained or not.
It has. Everything that comes in goes in there.
So,
Well, one of the
so
things
the
that
fresh water goes into the database, has gone into the database also.
So there's
That's
lots we can talk about in the weeds here, and just because of time, I really want to get us to the big picture of where we need to go today. Doesn't mean we won't, or someone won't at some point go back and really dig in to making sure that we get the monitoring plan and the evaluation methodology right. That's critical. I just want to, I'm focused on critical path in particular.
And I would say to that, Stacy, a critical path item is I have a placeholder in the adaptive management plan in the text for Boland Pond, which is what I sent you guys, a place that says insert data here. And that's why it's there, because I know that I need to get with you guys and make sure that we've got at least some sort of a synthesis of the data that can at least be put in to remind, to give us some sort of a baseline for Boland Pond. So that kind of information, that kind of feedback, I've already got 2 items that I'm going to add in here. As that comes in, this will get better. It will be more of a customized plan that meets all of your needs. I'm going to switch to Excel. So I'm going to end the slideshow. I'm going to go to Excel. I'm going to hope that we can see this a little bit better. These are tough. These are really tough to present. And I'm going down. I added some arrows. Your version doesn't have arrows. I was thinking about this some more and realized that one of the things that a linear Gantt chart doesn't show very well are the feedbacks and where an action item or a resolution fits into something else. And so what I want to try to illustrate, and I'm not thrilled by how this looks, frankly, but we're gonna try it. You see the purple. The purple are the uncertainty resolution items that I just talked you through. And what I envision as the mechanics of implementing this adaptive management plan, so how we're actually going to do this work, is we're going to spend some time in the spring, summer, and fall updating and pulling together the information that we need to do this independent rerun and review of the MEP data, as well as some of these other things that have come up. And so what happens? Okay, great. We've now done this update. How does that feed into decision-making? How does that inform next steps? Because as you'll remember from that Gantt chart, the whole point of phasing implementation is to monitor, evaluate, and change. That change that's really where we're going with this. It's not to monitor. Nobody cares about monitoring. As we've said, that the whole point is to really make better decisions in the future. So what I've done is drawn a line to the program management updates, which are the blue on the bottom. And this maybe isn't the best way to illustrate it, and we can think about a better way to illustrate it, but it would be the idea that you take the new information on what the MEP says, and you say, you know, we got to update not just the schedule and the cost estimates and the budget, but we got to our CWMP needs to be updated. And so from the uncertainty resolution, we have a pathway to go in and make changes. This continues every year. So I've just done this in calendar 2015, 2016. Let's see if I can get this. Yeah, so you can see it a little better. We've got 2017, 18, and those blue stacked quarter 4 action items include the schedule and the cost estimates and the budget and the financial plan and the regulatory framework that this is living in. So as we evaluate not only the overall objectives from a TMDL nitrogen perspective, but also, as it's written there that you can clearly see, evaluations from other demonstration projects, those are going to directly feed into these program management updates every year, and I think it should be done in the 4th quarter because it's the dead of winter and it's a great time to be looking at data and evaluate what you've done, because most of the work of these non-traditionals happens in the spring and the summer and through the fall. So you can collect all your data, and what I'm doing now in Falmouth is evaluating last summer's shellfish data because I'm not busy running a shellfish demonstration. And so that's how I envision the uncertainty resolution action items, that monitoring, that review of the MEP models, feeding into CWMP updates annually. So that's my perspective on the monitoring. I'm going to briefly, I know Stacy wants me to be done. I hear you. I'm coming.
Kids.
I'm moving. But this is important. You know, the AMP is important, and I'm trying to give you guys enough so that you can give me stuff back over the next week or 2 or 3 in terms of concrete. See it? Rewrite this. See it? Add this. We need to put this into the AMP. These are the capital projects. Are these the capital projects? So I should say parenthetically, we can't finish the adaptive management plan till we know what the plan is. We haven't finished our plan for Orleans. I have a pretty good idea for Town Cove. We've got a downtown wastewater collection and treatment project. We've got a PRB project. And we've got a shellfish demonstration project out of the gate in our plan. Maybe we're going to add other elements to the implementation of solutions in the shorter term or the longer term. But at least for these 3, we've got some specific items, some specific activities that have to go on to implement them. And they are fairly consistently funding, planning, designing, permitting, constructing, and then operating and maintaining them, and in various permutations. But certainly, funding, planning, design, and permitting are going to take a few years. That doesn't happen overnight. Mike and I were talking, and in my heart of hearts, I believe we could actually implement a demonstration for shellfish next summer, not this summer, but 2016 summer. But that's ambitious. That means that we're buying gear a year from now. That means we know how much we're putting, where we're putting it. I'm just talking, but the Gantt chart that you have in front of you tries to be what I would say cautiously ambitious, that we've been able to fund some projects so we can really start next year doing these demonstrations. But after town meeting, we may have to adjust that. And that's the whole point of adaptive management. You put out your best understanding of, and maybe a vision for where you'd like to be. You know, maybe we'd like to be testing floating wetlands and shellfish in a year from now, a year from this summer. Maybe we drive to that and then suddenly we realize there's no way we can get the permits in place. So it's going to have to slip. But you got to understand, you can't do it in February. So you're looking at a spring, summer installation, or you're out a year. You're not going to be putting your shellfish in February. Or you can, but they'll just freeze. Or they'll wait anyway. They won't do much. Same thing with the PRB. You know, you've got these seasonalities that you want to try to manage. So with that, I'm going to go back to the spreadsheet and talk you through the way these specific capital projects are being envisioned and how doing them feeds back into planning. So I'm gonna go with the traditional, the treatment and collection, because I think it's very important to recognize exactly what Jeff said, which is there are uncertainties. And one of the uncertainties is, are the construction planning level cost estimates correct? So we've got estimates based on no level, very preliminary. Then you've got design estimates, and at some point you want to make sure that your design estimates are in the same range of your other cost estimates. So I've got this orange square at Q3 2016, assuming we've finished 90% design, if you will. And you can say, okay, were the planning level estimates close to what the preliminary design estimates? So you get to 90% design and you do a much better job of actually costing out your collection and treatment system. There's another trigger point at 18 where we got our bids in, we started to construct this, are sewers in the same price range as we thought? Because that will inform future decisions. Were they more expensive, were they less expensive? So I've thought of these two places.
We have multiple tracks going on here with adaptive management, warrant articles, and the plan and stuff. One of the things that isn't there that I have to see a comment on is the disposal site. A big part of next year is the disposal site, and it's not reflected there. So we'll talk about that when we get to the warrant articles. But
good. Jeff.
Aren't we in the weeds? I mean, this is weedy. This is really weedy stuff. Okay, this doesn't get us anywhere except to talk about this thing, and that's got to happen, and so on.
Okay.
I mean, we're not doing this today. To go through this Gantt chart, what are we going to get out of it? I mean, what does it mean? It's all going to change. Talking about specific items on it.
So
This is really weedy.
Here's my thought of how we should approach this Gantt chart, which is in a somewhat conceptual way. That is, this is the approach. This is some of the components of the approach. We want to make sure people are comfortable. This is really about making sure that everybody's comfortable with the way this is going to be moving forward, right? That the core principles are embedded in this, that you have enough comfort that this is not a mirage, that somebody somewhere is going to be doing really serious thinking about making sure all these things get attended to, right? And right now, SIA is doing serious thinking, and this is the demonstration of that serious thinking. To the extent people feel like, I want to see a different format, or I want to see I want to see different kind of evidence of different serious thinking, that's kind of the level we're at now. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, and I'm trying to give you some weeds so you understand you may want to see different weeds.
I don't want to see any weeds at this point.
Well, you have to.
I'm concerned. I'm concerned because I've looked at this in detail, and for me, this is not an adequate starting point. And I'm wanting to know, where is the environmental scientist who's been through these things, who's going to prepare the adaptive management plan? Because this isn't going to do it.
a couple of comments there, Jeff. With regard to the weeds and the detail, it's always a judgment call from the consultant side as to how much detail get in, because some people don't want the detail. Some people say there's no detail there. What are you talking about? So we're trying to reach a balance there, and sometimes we hit it, sometimes we don't. The other factor, but the feedback's good. If it's weeds to everybody and no one wants it, that's fine. But there's usually 3 or 4 people when you talk about finances that come back and say, you didn't give us enough, you're not there yet. So that's a good comment. Feedback's welcome. The other thing is that Mr. Kelly, Mr. Dunford, and others are looking at me saying, what do we put in the warrant articles? How much do we put in there? Where'd you get that number? Why are we doing that next year? We need some kind of baseline, that, like a Gantt chart that says this year we're going to do this, this, this. It may change. It's going to change. But that's the baseline that we're kind of working from going forward. So we're trying to get in the details so we're not just throwing darts at the wall on one hand. But
My concern is, each meeting, we fail to complete the agenda, and we're spending a lot of time on this, and we've got draft consensus, warrant article drafts, and financial analysis update to go through.
yeah.
And I don't see any relevance to what's happening now in what's being discussed.
Okay, so I'm going to put the positive frame on this, right? And first of all, Jeff, I want to capture the comment that you made, which is we need to think seriously about what kind of expertise, and I think, Mark, this covers the comment you made earlier about monitoring as well, about what kind of expertise is brought to bear at what points on what things, right? And give that a little bit more thought, because I think that's often really important, that we make sure that we're reflecting that we are really going to draw on the expertise and the knowledge that we need, and the people who hold that special expertise and knowledge as we go. So
Comment. I got to interrupt. Another perspective that's important. We're dealing with a big range of stuff here. The adaptive management plan has got a lot of different components to it. Stantec has a national expert in adaptive management that they brought to the table from North Carolina. I don't know if he was here or not. Excellent, excellent adaptive management planning in environmental settings. The theory, the application in different places is great. But you bring him to New Orleans and he says, now, where is Town Cove? Where's this? Where's that? There's this gap between theory and national practice and local application. So while Doug Beach was involved, at some point he says, Sia, you take it, number one. We need that theory, but we need to apply it.
And
Number
this
two,
framework is his theory. I mean, honestly, every element in this plan came from...
theoretically, it's okay, but I think what Jeff's saying, too, is that we need to get the specifics, but maybe not at this meeting. But
I'm done.
The other thing, too, is that, just one last point, on the Cape, right now, there's experts in aquaculture. I don't know of an expert in floating constructed wetlands. There's our experts at PRBs, but the PRB expert is not a floating constructed wetland expert. The floating constructed wetland expert isn't an expert in aquaculture. So when you talk about bring the experts, we could have 6 people here, but I don't know anyone better than Sia on the Cape that knows overall how to bring the significant amount of expertise. She doesn't walk on water on all these things, maybe 1 or 2, but
Only when there's ice.
all these things. But what we really need here is coordination and planning and management and structure as opposed to expertise. The experts will be here.
So, okay, so let me leave that aside for a second. There was one other thing I think that Mike mentioned about what we do need to do with this, which is get this year right. Right. So outlining what are the tasks that are going to be in the warrant and how those relate to the trigger points and the questions we need to answer to move us forward. I think that relationship was really why we put this presentation in here at this stage, so that people really see, are we reflecting in the warrants, in the things we want to fund next year, the kinds of evaluations that are essential for moving the program as a whole forward over time, and the relationship between those things. So those are the things we want to make sure we get right enough that we're on the right path in the short term.
Stacy, I wish you would add to the chart over there, regulatory review and approval for all the things that Jeff and others raised here. It's Cape Cod Commission, it's DEP, and ultimately EPA.
DMF.
So they are the ones that are going to say, okay, your protocols are acceptable or not. And we need to know that before we start spending money.
Yeah, and I think a lot, there's, right now, the warrants really do the best job of outlining next year's tasks. We have to make sure those are reflected in the Gantt chart for next year's work. So we just have to do that coordination better.
Just related to a number of the comments this morning, I think there needs to be some real thought given and structure for how disputes over interpretation of data will be managed in the process. Because I think it's not only the monitoring data itself, but how you are integrating new water quality models, water quality data, and results of rerunning models. And there are just so many variables here that can be interpreted into various ways that needs to be planned for.
That's got to be done.
Okay, so
Excellent.
if it's okay with everyone, I'd like to move on for now from adaptive management. Can you pull up my decision? So I turn your attention to the draft text for the agreement. So, as I said in my email, what I tried to do here is, with the exception of item 7, right, which I put in red, which shows up in light gray. With the exception of that, I really tried to reflect what I thought we have already heard and discussed, and there was some, in theory, agreement. I may not have gotten it all right, though. I'm sure that I did not. The protocols for our decision-making I put up here, and these come from the operating protocols that were approved by the group and by the Board of Selectmen prior to the launching of this process, right? And so these were the rules that we decided on in advance about how we make decisions as a group. So, to remind you, right, the goal here is to get a unanimous concurrence of the primary stakeholder representatives, right, or their alternates. And our fallback is to get a concurrence and along with potential abstentions if people felt like they had to abstain. So to abstain would mean to say, not sure I'm ready to say I'm going to commit myself wholeheartedly to supporting this, but I'm also not going to fight it or try to stop it, right? Or block it, right? So we're shooting first for consensus, which is concurrence. Right? And by doing that, what we're trying to do is figure out what is it we can agree to. If there are things that have to be stepped back, we can try and step them back. Right? Whatever we need to do, what is it we can agree to? It needs to be enough, hopefully, to move us forward for next year, right? As much as we can get. If we can't manage, if there's something in here, as you read it, that really does not work for you, the thing that is helpful at this stage is for you to offer an alternative, right? To say, here's what isn't working for me. It would work for me better if you used this word, if you inserted this word, if you took out that phrase, if you added this phrase, right? If you removed this point and put this point instead, and here's why, and then we can discuss and see can the group all live with that, right? So the conversation has to be really constructive at this point. To just say, I don't like it, does not work at this point. We're past that, right? If we have to get to lack of consensus, then we'll figure out what we can agree to. And if there's areas where the town wants to move forward or needs to move forward with warrants that are not consensus-based from this group, they'll have to figure that out, right? But what we want to do is make sure that we are as clear as possible about what we agree on going forward, and if there are things we need to say we don't agree on, we can do that as well. Okay? So just to remind you of the ground rules for decisions. So, with that, I open this to constructive discussion. Yes?
Just one insert, Stacy, specifically on the second paragraph. third line, we define the term "the plan."
Yeah.
Put a footnote that refers to the existing DRI-approved plan, just the date, the specifics, just because I think this may be referred to in future regulatory proceedings. It's good to tie it back to the plan that this,
So this is amending.
amending it.
The new plan will be amending the approved CWMP, approved on blah, blah, that. Okay.
Thanks.
Other comments? Why don't we stick with those first opening two paragraphs to start with, to just direct our attention. So just to be clear, what those paragraphs do, the first paragraph is really coming straight out of the protocols, again, describing who we are and a little bit about our process. And then describing what this is. This is an agreement about principles and some key elements, right? So coming into this process, we might have thought that by the end of it, we were going to have an agreed plan in all of its gory detail. We do not have that, right? So that paragraph is really meant to be clear about that. This is not, you are not agreeing on the plan. You are agreeing on some key principles, some components of that plan, right? And the plan is going to have to be developed in much more detail in accordance with these principles and including these components. That's what those paragraphs are meant to do.
Sorry. I've given you some words this morning for the sentence that starts off, "This agreement includes," in the second paragraph. And the reason that for the change is to reflect just what you've said, is that, you know, this is, we're agreeing to some principles and some, you know, guiding elements in this, and the concern is, you know, what becomes of this if some of that falls apart, and those words reflect it. And it's basic. It says the agreement includes and requires the successful completion of steps described here to resolve uncertainties, on and on and on, and ends that adheres to the key elements and principles of the plan. So it ties it back to, you know, maintaining what we have today in not in its entirety. Certainly, it's going to change, but that we don't go too far afield from what we have today, because that's changes the game entirely.
And I try to reflect that as well in the commitment at the end, so we can look back at that language as well. But so Jeff's suggested language is to where it says this agreement includes. He suggested adding and requires the successful completion of the steps to resolve uncertainties going on, and then adding at the end that adheres to the key elements. Right? So just a clarification of meaning. Okay. So moving on to the agreed goals and objectives. You'll see we have 3 agreed goals and objectives, or I put them into 3. So to really be clear about what we are trying to do here, what you all have agreed to that this plan's goals include, in terms of nitrogen reduction, in terms of meeting federal, state regulations, but also that there is a commitment to respond to any new information and update information so that we know that we really are reacting to fixing the problem that exists as it exists.
Stacy, just in the second line where we go local, then state,
Yeah.
I think we need to include regional because the
Yep.
Cape Cod Commission controls this.
Yep. Good.
Very good.
Okay. The second point says that we're also, in addition to nitrogen, we are looking at phosphorus. We are addressing sanitary concerns, or we can change it to public health concerns. and ensure that wastewater needs are met. Right? And also, we are seeking to restore natural ecosystem services, and I have some definition down there of that, and it clarifies a little bit more about that. And then the third point is about
Stacy, just on
affordability.
point
Yeah.
two.
Point two.
And ensure wastewater needs are met for all residents, businesses, and institutions in Orleans is an extremely broad statement.
Okay.
Perhaps we need to identify goals. To me, it just seems extremely broad and
Yeah.
wide open.
So, just to be clear about what that is meant to cover, it's meant to cover the things we had talked about businesses that are not able to adequately operate, or others, residences, places that cannot enjoy the same sort of use of their properties because their wastewater needs are not being met. So maybe there's a way to phrase it that's less broad, that does include, because that is one of the goals, that is part of what this plan is trying to achieve, so we want to make sure that we're clear about what that is.
I suggest, one of the ways to do this might be to phrase it essential wastewater services, rather than the broad sense. I mean, I don't know if that does it for you or not.
Move in the right direction, definitely, yeah.
I think we have businesses in other parts of town besides the purple downtown. We have the East Orleans area, we have the South Orleans area, we have scattered businesses in other places, so it isn't.
That are not able to currently.
I don't know whether they are or not, but.
I mean, I think the goal is, by the time we're done with all of our implementation, that we're gonna meet those needs, right? I mean, is that not or is the town satisfied with some? I don't know.
Well, I think the risk there, and Gordon's raised it, is that, somebody can say that this is an essential need and you haven't fulfilled it, and you have to do this to fulfill that need.
Yeah.
It could
And
attract.
I just want to point out the word seeks, though, is what we're saying the plan seeks to meet those needs. It doesn't commit to meeting those needs.
Do you agree with that, Brian?
At this point, that's what we're doing.
Well, it seeks to meet, it doesn't say it seeks to meet regulatory needs. It commits to meeting regulatory needs, but it commits, I guess it says it seeks still, but
Well,
it,
I mean, you come up with a plan, and then we either accept it or we don't. So, right now, it's in your hands to come up with the plan that you think is the right plan. We're on the right track.
I mean, we're wordsmithing here to a certain degree, and I think ensure is a pretty affirmative word that might be giving some people pause. At this stage, maybe the references address sanitary concerns and endeavor the wastewater or water quality needs of the community. Period. And just leave it at that broad spectrum at this stage of the game. Now, and to drill into that thought for a second, doctors' offices use a lot of water, and it's difficult to build a medical professional's suite because of the size of the septic system, Title V requirements. But a lot of people in this community need a local medical resource, and it's harder for medical professionals to relocate here. Their need is not necessarily wastewater. Their need is the doctor who can't move here because of wastewater. So some of these are indirect, and I'm trying to capture the indirect as much as the direct.
okay, so a less affirmative word there, maybe a little less detail on who it serves.
Maybe say are addressed rather than are met.
Or you could say optimize the overall solution for the community, since there are going to be some people winners, some people losers, whatever. Our plan will maximize that gain.
We'll leave out the losers. Okay, I think I get the principle there, so I think I can, I think the thing that I'm going to do is take all these comments, we're going to see if we can get, again, an agreement in principle, and I'm going to get final language to you at the end. So we're not trying to change language on the screen, right? Okay. Number 3, seeks affordability and fairness in distribution of cost recovery. And my last sentence there, the town of Orleans should not have to choose between water quality and affordability. So that's a principle. It's a goal. It's what you see.
It's a goal.
It's a very important goal.
It's very important.
But it is a goal.
And to be honest, right, if you as a town are going to move forward as one of your next steps with trying to find state, regional, federal support, you want an agreement that the whole town is moving forward together and that the whole town thinks it's important that you get, that this thing is affordable, right? So these are principles that actually are also for you to think about as what you need to take this thing to get this thing.
Stacy, quick one. Is the need to have recovery even in there? Wouldn't it be better to just say distribution of costs? Because you've got, recovery means recovery of capital, but there's also O&M that you also want not to have a burden. I don't think recovery is
So
even,
just in
cost.
distribution of costs.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what
I agree with that.
Good.
Make it plural.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Moving on. Agreed plan, approach, and key elements. So this section is a mixture of more or less specific components of the plan and more conceptual components or elements of the plan, right? And that the group has said, as we've been going through, as we talked about the plan last time, right, and put it up here, you know, that this is in the realm of what people think is the direction to go, right? Knowing, of course, there's still all the uncertainties, where's the effluent going, and we still have to figure this out and that out, but that this is the direction, this is the approach. So comments on item, I guess we could start with item 4. Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, just first a note to everyone. The Pleasant Bay Alliance has not had a chance to review the hybrid plan yet. We are actually going to be meeting with Mike and Sia, and I think that will lead to some comments. So just to let you know that that will be forthcoming. Just, you know, this particular item notes that, you know, the intent of the plan is to maximize use of non-traditional technologies, and there's a mention here that this could include realizing up to 2/3 of the town's nitrogen reduction using non-traditional technologies. Just an observation that this seems to spread the risk or uncertainty of non-traditional technologies and their performance across the town, but not necessarily across watersheds equally. So the Pleasant Bay watershed, where I think, you know, the Pleasant Bay watershed is being relied upon to use non-traditional technologies to deal with a higher percentage of nitrogen reduction. So I think that's just an important concept here that, you know, obviously town-wide considerations are important, but looking at how risk is applied to each watershed is also something that should be considered. And the last sentence of this particular item, the findings from demonstration projects will be used to refine the locations and aerial extent of non-traditional solutions as well as their costs and so forth. This really is not what's reflected on the hybrid map, which seems to, you know, clearly specify where, you know, the extent to which non-traditional technologies would be applied in Pleasant Bay. So I think that that's...
So just to that point, if you look at the while there is still much to learn sentence, up at the first full sentence on page 2, the plan highlights potential locations where each of these technologies is most likely to be effective and calculates an estimated sizing of each to meet water quality needs. So that's what's reflected on the map. And that last sentence is meant to say, and that's just preliminary because those things are going to be refined based on what we learned from demonstration projects. So that's what that's the connection there is. Yes, we have a map. SIA did a lot of work to figure out where these things really realistically might go, how big they might be, right? What they might achieve. And so we should acknowledge that amount, and know that there's going to have to be more work once we know more to adjust that. So that's what I was trying to do with that.
Well, just, I thought we had a very good discussion earlier about the, I think SIA's outline, the approach outlined seemed to me to be a very sound approach, but obviously we discussed and identified a lot of questions, and I think another one I would add that I don't think we really mentioned, which maybe could be put on the list, is dealing with installation and O&M issues that, are undoubtedly going to come up. So I guess an alternative perspective on this would be, rather than to identify, or in addition to identifying the potential locations where alternative or non-traditional technologies could be effective, to as clearly articulate the Plan B or alternative approach that would be employed if those do not prove effective or as effective or widely applicable as anticipated. Because I think otherwise you are laying a foundation here for further decision making. That, that's a big leap, and assuming a lot of risk of performance, assigned to the Pleasant Bay watershed.
Okay, and just to say my response to that, because I think the group has in theory embraced that idea, was that I put it in item 8 under the adaptive management. But, so we'll hold that thought as we go.
Just on the same area, I get a little skeptical when I see the words where each of these technologies is most likely to be effective. And in effect, what we're doing is we're seeing if they have any viability at all. So we've made a judgment not having tested them. So I think you've got to, I know where you're going, I sort of generally agree with what you're trying to do, but I have concern about that. That's a decision made before you've tested any of them. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, with all
Yeah.
Well, with all respect, I think there are a lot of places in here where directions and decisions are being made where we haven't tested a lot of stuff. There are still questions that are open. So I think if we wait to really have a final answer on all this stuff, then it's going to be a while yet. I think, certainly the way I'm reading this, I'm taking this as subject to some additional stuff we need to do.
Well, that's what's meant, right? And so we just want to be clear about that we're reflecting where we are, right? And the reason that I kept in the things about the map is we had meeting after meeting after meeting in which we looked at and adapted and changed where the non-traditional technologies might be. And also, I think there's something important on that the plan, as it is, with a lot of uncertainty, they use Tracker, right? It's really designed to meet requirements. And we want to, we put those things on there because those requirements have to be met. So I just wanted to make sure that in our agreement we're reflecting that we did that work. SIA got in boats, looked at places. Again, there's a lot. I put things like there's still much to be learned. We're going to have to change things. There's going to be adaptive management. There's fallbacks. If I need to be more clear in the language that there's a lot of uncertainty here, and we're starting with a vision, and we're going to make it better as we go. Tell me what language to change that can do that.
So, Stacy, just very specifically,
Good.
the term "is most likely to be effective"
Yes.
has to be modified in some way because we don't know that. It has a higher probability.
How about could potentially be?
That's better, much better,
Okay.
because we can't find a constructed wetland anywhere in New England, and yet we've got them. And I want to try them, but
And I agree with this, but also when it comes down to the map, we need to put those tests on the map and display them as, these are the demos.
Well, we don't, we haven't
I know we
identified
haven't
what the
gotten there
demos
yet, but
are.
that'll take care of a lot of what we're talking about, because right now, we have a whole lot of basically floating flower pots.
Right. I mean, the problem is, we're identifying the demos in our first phase of work, right? We're funding studies to identify where those demos are going to be as part of the warrant. It's not going to get done between now and then. So that's why.
That has to be noted somewhere on the map, that these are, that we have to have, people are going to be looking at the map, and right now they're saying, okay, we're going to put all those in there.
Yep.
And we are putting in purple and we are putting in salmon.
Right.
But we're not necessarily putting in the non-traditionals yet.
So if I have the plan highlights, I could say the plan map highlights, potential locations.
I agree with this, it's that I don't. In other words, what I'm saying is, I like Alan's wording.
Yeah.
But the map right now, if you just look at it, it looks like we're going to do all that. We are going to do purple, we are going to do salmon, but we're not necessarily going to do all the little things, because we haven't had the demos yet.
Well, that's right. Yes, but Mr. Dunford made a good point. The purple, we may not do either.
That's right.
We don't have a site, we don't have purple.
Oh, that's
We don't have a plant site and a disposal site, we don't have pink. So what we're talking about here is, I don't want to use the word shades of gray.
Very current of you.
I didn't see it,
A lot less than 50, I hope.
But what we have here is elements, ranges of uncertainty. At some point, we say we're high enough up on the certainty graph to where we can put something on the map, and other places we say we need adaptive management. Pleasant Bay is one of those places where we have recommended, projected things, but we have big MEP issues in the main bodies and some other stuff, so we'll deal with that this afternoon. But I like Carol's idea of a Plan B. I think from a number of points of view, on both sides of the table, or four sides of the table, however many there are, we do need a boundary for what happens if. I mean, that's a question like the elephant in the room, like what happens if? And that's a serious question that I think we do need to address. And that would put some context or limit to what Carol's saying as to, well, where do we go then? And that Plan B isn't going to be where we go, but it's an extreme that, or some sort of boundary that says that this is what we're really facing with regard to, as Joshua's been saying, risk tolerance. So,
Jeff, then Carolyn.
There's another aspect to talking about the non-traditionals and the traditionals and what portion you do of each. And that is the uncertainty that's involved in the traditional solutions. There's no certainty that they're going to improve water quality or restore habitats. We don't know that. We know it'll reduce nitrogen in the groundwater, but we don't know what it will do to restore the what is important to us. In fact, I got a note yesterday from Dr. Dow, who's a marine biologist and worked in fisheries business and has been senior person in the Sierra Club on the Cape. And he says the Clean Water Act Section 208 process is too narrowly focused, and he's implying on nitrogen reduction, to solve our water quality problems and restore the habitats necessary for wild things. And that's it in a nutshell. Non-traditional technologies, we may find out, are the best deal going. And there's risk on both sides. You can sewer everything around all these water bodies and find out 30 years later it isn't going to fix the problem.
So you mean it could be both?
And you can, and this is a reason why we need to get the folks from Wellfleet in here. They're depending upon non-traditional methods to fix Wellfleet Harbor and the Wellfleet system. And they've had a number of successes doing that. And they're embarking, we don't realize, these people are embarking on what I believe is the largest coastal habitat restoration project in the whole of the United States. They're going to restore a more than 1,000 acre salt marsh system, or marsh system, riverine system. And that's a big deal. We don't consider that. I mean, in the United States, if we find a 10-acre salt marsh restoration, that's considered sort of big stuff. Wellfleet's doing one at 1,000 acres.
So, thanks. So I want to focus us back in on getting the language in the agreement that reflects all of these things. Carolyn, I know you wanted to speak, and then Mark. But if I could try to get you guys focused on the language, yeah.
I think we've talked a lot about S-curves and risk, and I don't think that's reflected in this. I'll just take this paragraph as an example.
Okay.
Because we know that none of these technologies have been tested in this environment before, and what their efficacy might be. And we've all acknowledged that, but I don't think this acknowledges the fact that we have talked about those things and that there is still a huge learning curve, risk curve out there that may indeed send us in another direction.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So one suggestion, as Carolyn's saying, that we could do here is actually say a little bit more about some of the uncertainties and risks. Specify, like, this has not been applied here, just use some of the more detailed information that we have looked at. We might at the same time also highlight the promise from what we do know. So we could just put a little bit more detail information so that people reading this can get a better picture, the picture that we have sort of now a little more in the back of our heads of both the promise and the uncertainties about these non-traditional technologies, instead of just trying to
reference the
If you've got the promise, you haven't got the uncertainty.
Pardon me for being a little bit slow, but I'm getting confused on, we talk about the plan and your consensus agreement, and then everybody talks about that chart. Is that chart the plan?
That chart is where, this chart, as far as I can tell, this map, right, reflects where, as far as we've gotten in identifying.
And that's fine. So everything
Right.
in the consensus agreement talks to the plan, which is not necessarily that chart.
There's a component of it.
The map, the agreement refers to the map, because the agreement, we have made agreement in principle about a couple things about the map. We have made an agreement in principle about the purple area and the salmon area, for example. If I don't have a map that we can refer people to, it's going to be hard to describe exactly what the group has agreed to, again, if all the other investigations work out along those lines, right? The way that I refer to the non-traditionals that are on the map is they're placed there as potential possible sites that might, be served by those technologies, and that'll all have to get refined. So that's, but the agreement perhaps needs to be much more clear about what it's saying and what its relationship is to the map. Sims?
Okay, so going back to the last sentence of number 4, which I think is what we're trying to work our way through. I think the effort to be as specific as possible might be creating the stumbling block. I would recommend somewhat more open language in that sentence. To the idea of findings from demonstration projects will inform adaptive management processes and future water quality decisions. That, as presently phrased, we are absolutely committed to non-traditional endeavors. Where we may find somewhere in the future the non-traditional just doesn't do it. And if the concern expands beyond nitrogen, we're going to have to find other solutions. And if it expands beyond nitrogen sooner rather than later, the non-traditionals may not be the best answer. So I think if we leave ourselves the most flexibility and the most open wording, it'll be easier to get a consensus.
I like the word inform and adapt.
Yeah,
Refer to
inform
the
adaptive management. But are you saying, Sims, to get rid of refined locations and extent, expected costs and contributions?
I expect those to be on the inside of the adaptive management process. To the degree to which you wish to express that, either there or in number 8, is up to the author. But I think the emphasis on the closing sentence in number 4 should be on flexibility, adaptability, and a variety of solutions and decision-making processes in the future.
In the first line of paragraph 4, newly emerging, please delete it. And these things have been around for a while, so we don't need newly emerging. And in paragraph 5, the very end of the paragraph says appropriate circumstances, this is referring to satellites or clusters, may be evaluated for other locations. I think it's will be evaluated for other locations. It's not, they might be evaluated. We had that discussion last week, I think. And as far as Meeting House Pond, paragraph 6 is concerned, my understanding that the plan includes a satellite plant to deal with Meeting House Pond. It doesn't, what's the verb here? It doesn't recommend, the plan includes that. It's part of the plan. The sites need to be confirmed, and you might want to say that or not. I'll leave that up to you. On paragraph 7.
Before you go to 7, let's just go back to 5 and 6. Other comments on 5 and 6?
One question. I don't know whether this is traditional, non-traditional, but I think I would like to see a specific item, inlet management, considered as part of the potential solutions, at least in Town Cove. We've seen evidence that nitrogen was okay for a while, and as the inlet only got worse. So somehow, I don't know how we would fit that in. It's kind of inefficient.
That's in Eastham.
Eastham, yeah. No. I'm sure they'll be cooperative.
Oh, yeah. We'll spend every dollar.
I mean, I would just, let me suggest this, Gordon, and I think we do say at some point, when we have permeable reactive barriers in the very top line on item 4 on page 2, where it says, and other new technologies. Inlet widening, I guess, is not a new technology, so maybe other technologies. So we don't necessarily name it, but we have other technologies stays in here. Can you live with that?
Yeah.
Could you put parentheses, e.g.?
Inlet widening?
Inlet, why, sure.
Inlet management?
Some designation.
I wouldn't say widening.
Management.
Yeah,
Management.
a fairly extensive discussion about widening inlets in areas of
Right.
critical environmental concern, and that's not going to happen.
Management, right.
And a very
Approaches
sound,
and technologies.
pointing out that you got a really deep sort of pedal on widening the inlets and letting it do flushing. The gentleman brought up information about the town code is something that Mike and I actually started to look at, and thought, I think that particular inlet and the particular shoaling and whatnot, and whether there could be additional flushing is worth looking at. And I think what I should do is add it into the adaptive management plan for Town Cove as something to be looking at going forward.
I think it was flagged in one of the handouts I saw.
Okay, good. It's there.
Just one other point. This is all within the Cape Cod National Seashore, and the Cape Cod National Seashore believes and promotes natural evolution. So
We're just saying that
It's
we're
in
going to
there.
consider these approaches.
don't get excited.
We may hit dead ends, but we're going to consider it.
So all we do is
Good.
move the
Anything else on, so 5 is, got a lot in there, and I tried to really make sure that we're clear about what it is. we as a group seem to be agreeing to, right, about the footprints and how big they are and where they would go and what we're going to try and do with them. Changing the may to will at the end of that paragraph. Anything else on item 5? Yeah.
Yeah, I think just the one word in the third line, essential, I think that may be a little on the strong side. I might use preferable or appropriate. I mean, again, we don't know where the answers to questions will come out. And essential is saying, basically to me, you do it no matter what.
Yeah.
So it's just a different word.
And, frankly, like with Meeting House where we say includes, we could just say 2 footprints within Orleans have been included for sewers,
Yep.
for implementation of sewers, right? Okay. Yeah.
Sorry, the other aspect that I guess I need to do a little more reading on, there's a lot of emphasis on sanitary needs here. And as I look, I'd be willing to go along with that, although, the extent of those sanitary needs, I think that might be useful to have a little further conversation on that. But to me, the importance of that really is getting into the cost allocation question. So I guess in a sense, I'm okay with having that there, even though I'm uncertain as to what the extent of that is. But to me, that's really cost allocation, because sanitary needs applies something else. It's very much more localized as opposed to a town-wide issue.
He's talking about in 5. I don't
In
know if
5.
the word sanitary needs is in there, but I think here.
Well,
that
it
we're
starts.
trying to really, no, I get your point, that,
I
again,
think
I was trying in here to be clear for people who, outside of this group, who might be reading this, so that they understand what this group has decided, why this group has agreed that those areas are important for sewer.
The sentence I'm looking at is the one that, it's about halfway down, and the last 2 words of the line are the downtown. The downtown area includes numerous properties with out-of-date and or failing systems that do not meet state Title V standards. That gets at sanitary needs.
What number are you on, John?
Number 5.
Mid-paragraph.
Mid-paragraph.
Okay.
On the left. It's easy to find that.
So that's the sentence.
Do people have comments on those sentences before we move on to a different one?
We need to make the distinction between sanitary needs and public health needs.
Okay.
Sanitary needs don't necessarily reflect whether a system is a public health threat or not. And I would refer readers back to the needs assessment that was done for the Wastewater Management Steering Committee years ago, which will define sanitary needs. And it actually has more to do with Title V than septic overflows.
It's in the chapter on the CWMP.
Right. So is that something, just in terms of how sanitary needs is used in, point
It's in here.
On agreed goals and concerns of point number 2.
2?
I mean, one suggestion we had was to replace sanitary with public health. Sanitary is a somewhat antiquated term. Comes from back when I went to school when you were a sanitary engineer. And it's been carried forth, but it's really public health. We're talking about public health, but we're not just talking about downtown either. These same situations that you see downtown are reflected in other parts of town as well. There's cesspools, failing systems, et cetera, et cetera.
And I don't dispute the need to address that stuff, Mike. Where it comes in is who's paying for it.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
That's the big issue.
So, David, I'm wondering if item 3 in the agreed goals and objectives, when we say we want affordability and we want fairness, maybe we should say something about fairness includes, an equitable allocation of costs given benefits, or something, like something that really gets at your point of, the group feels like, to the extent some of these things are providing economic benefit for businesses downtown, the cost allocation should reflect that,
It should reflect that.
right? So I could basically try to just add a little bit more information about what we mean when we talk about fairness. We haven't gotten all the way there yet. But, I could try and put something in there about that.
That's an important consideration.
Just to, I guess, circle back to Mike's point, sanitary requirements are different than public health needs. Sanitary requirements are sizing a Title V system for a certain size or a certain use on a site. Those are sanitary requirements, sanitary needs. You need a system of X dimensions and capacities to pursue such use on such property. If you can't meet those, you are constrained by the sanitary requirements for that site. Doesn't mean that a public health hazard exists. I think we need to be very careful about keeping those separate.
So you're suggesting we keep the word sanitary rather than move to public health? Because to say we have public health concerns we haven't made that case.
Public health, I think, raises sort of a fear factor that I think is unfair in this conversation, when in fact people are constrained by the regulatory requirements of meeting the sanitary system standards for a site. Am I missing anything here, Brian? On the spot.
I mean,
if you need to have a system that has a throughput of 2,000 gallons a day, and you can't put that big a leach field on your site, then you can't have that use. That's a sanitary need. It's not a public health problem.
Right. And, I was looking back at the CWMP to try and better understand this myself, and it seemed that the issues of, for example, pumping out on a extremely frequent basis was talked about in the CWMP as in the category of aesthetic and economic concerns, rather than in the category of public health or sanitary concerns. So I don't know what that adds or doesn't, but if we're referring people back to the CWMP to understand the needs that this is solving, should we draw back specifically on some of those terms, the ways that they categorize the problems?
Stacy, just to put some numbers on this,
Yeah.
12% of the systems downtown are cesspools,
Okay.
and 62% are either cesspools or over 20 years old.
Within this purple area, you're
Right.
saying?
That's from the Board of Health records.
Aging or non-compliant systems? I mean, we can say that.
I agree with Sims's distinction there between sanitary and public health in that context. The sanitary, as you refer to the DEP, design criteria in Title V, are the means. I look at public health as the why. The means of doing it are through sanitary engineering and design principles. But in the end of the day, sanitary and public health are in agreement in the sense that they focus on bacteria and pathogens, as opposed to nitrogen. That's the main distinction we're trying to make here, is that the original intent of these systems was not nitrogen, it was bacteria and health. So how you designed it was fine, whatever you want to call it. But the fact is, there's a public health issue here with seepage pits and cesspools and breakouts into the street and stuff like that. So while it's been maintained, and the U.S. has gone a long way to controlling it, there's a lot of places where it's not in the U.S. too. So that's the distinction I see there with public health.
Okay, so I can play with those ideas a little bit more. Anything else in, yes, Carol?
I wonder if here might be the place to add, picking up on what Mike said earlier about the Plan B, if this might be the place to identify that those footprints would be included in the plan.
The what footprints?
I'm sorry, the footprints for sewering areas in the event that you don't pursue alternative technologies to the extent indicated on the map.
Would that be an 8?
Well,
I would think the adaptive management plan paragraph, it'd be a good place for it.
And just, Carol, to be clear, one thought I had about just organizationally for number 5 is we have a defined, clear, and agreed upon area. We have 2 defined, clear, agreed upon areas. If Plan B happens, we haven't agreed on anything yet.
Right.
We have not agreed how big, we haven't agreed where they go, we haven't agreed any of that stuff. And to mix that in the same paragraph, I feel like might dilute what we have agreed to.
right, and I understand the rationale on on number 8. I would suggest to the group that that should happen, that discussion, the definition of those areas should happen as part of this plan and not be deferred to adaptive management, because then it's still an open question. So I just suggest that that's a discussion that should happen now and have agreement now, as opposed to waiting and having that discussion later.
If this states that we're going to sewer everything, if that's the out, then I'm out of this agreement, okay? And, the regulatory requirements are set up around nitrogen reduction. The fact is that if we don't succeed with the non-traditional technologies, we got to do something about it. So it brings us right back to it, and we have to decide on another solution. So, it's not like you can just go on and ignore it. It's written into the rules.
And the other thing, Carol, I would say about trying to agree with the agreement right now is we don't really know the extent to which the non-traditionals will work. They may work at a smaller amount than, and they may work to a greater extent. So trying to define, what specifically to do, it would almost be impossible. But I would say, and the reason I thought the adaptive management plan made sense, is there are trigger and decision points after 3 years of evaluating, monitoring PRVs, for example, from floating wetlands. And it seems to me that would be a good place for us to get agreement in the adaptive management plan for, what if PRVs can't be located? What are we going to do next in town code? And those are difficult decisions and conversations to have, and you may want to get some of that agreed on as part of this process. The other thing, and I think part of what Brian said, is when we did the targeted watershed for Falmouth for Little Pond, we had a non-traditional, this is just a regulatory framework that we worked in, there was a non-traditional plan for addressing a portion of the nitrogen that was needed. So we had sewering for part of it, and then a small fraction, we addressed with non-traditional technologies. However, there was also a fallback position, if you will, or plan B, if the non-traditionals didn't work. What traditional methodology was the end point if the non-traditionals didn't work? So we have that.
Yeah, that was the point that I wanted to make, is that I've said before that there has to be a contingency plan in the event that non-polluting technologies are not working as approved or as projected. And I think the thing is that it's true that you're looking at an adaptive plan and you have decision points and you can figure out how effective they are if they meet half the expectations, if they meet 100% of the expectations, if they meet a quarter of the expectations. That's how you make, that's how you move forward in figuring out how you adjust the plan. But I think the backbone of that always has to be that there is a contingency. And the contingency is what the original CWMP was. Now, that's not to say that this plan is saying that you have to do all that. It's just saying that that is the backstop. That is the final, that's the final element that you employ if all these other things do not work. And, you know, I think what the language in 8 is that it sets up not the expectation, but the understanding that additional things may have to be done as we look at the effectiveness and efficacy of these other approaches. But as in Falmouth, we did require a contingency, and I mean, certainly willing to give all these other approaches a fair evaluation to determine how effective they are and incorporate those into the overall plan. But at the end of the day, there has to be a backstop, and you know, the original plan is that backstop.
Is, in number 8, the first sentence, Brian, is that enough? Pardon? Is that enough of a backup, the first sentence in number 8? I know I'm skipping ahead too, but that's right there. I mean...
Yeah, I mean, you know, I
don't know if that sentence is enough. But
I've kind of struggled with that, but I think the thing is that understanding, you know, kind of the balance between what we expect, but then also how this gets presented. I think that's setting up the understanding that additional things may have to be done. Those additional things may have to be further defined, and you know, like I said, there is the ultimate contingency plan. But I mean, for the time being, I think I'd go along with it. Yeah.
And just to be, this is meant to say that further things will be defined in the adaptive management plan, but we're not asking the group right now to say this adaptive management plan, every word of it is what we agree to, right? We're just not there. It just doesn't make sense, right? In the same way that we don't have the whole plan here. What we have is a commitment that this is the approach we're taking, right? So I want to move off that particular point. Carol, do you want to make one more?
Just one more quick point. I think somewhere, I would just request that you consider somewhere in the statement providing more definition as to whatever the contingency is. And the reason I say that is because otherwise, you know, looking at the statement, looking at the figure, you have 2 layers of risk for Pleasant Bay. You have the risk of or uncertainty of the non-traditional technologies. You have the risk and uncertainty of what is the adaptive management plan, which is, you know, with many variables yet to be determined. So there's this overlapping risk that is assumed for that watershed that isn't as high a risk for other watersheds in town. So I would just urge you to consider that further definition at an early stage.
Okay, so back in particular to the representative, the stakeholder representatives, and feedback and input from liaisons is helpful, but getting really into the what other changes such that the stakeholders are this is gonna meet their needs, yeah.
Can I go on to 7 now?
Yes, so for 6, just to be clear on 6, I've changed it to includes instead of recommends.
7, I raised the points on the septage discussion this morning about right sizing and non-commit. Those, I think that needs to be part of this, that's the basis on which we're proceeding.
So these are the principles that came up for septage. Benefit of investment flow goes to those who pay for it. Right sizing, not competing for volume on price. Considering nitrogen credit or pay, you know, a cost for disposing of other people's nitrogen. I don't know if separating collection and treatment in the financial analysis rises to this level. Or like for like comparison.
Yeah, those two were separate.
Those are separate, okay. So for these points, integrating those in to item 7.
Yes.
Everybody okay with that? Okay. Item 8. I already thought the plan will include instead of the plan includes, since we're still in progress, and we'll acknowledge that. Do people have other thoughts about how we change item 8 to make sure we're sufficiently clear that this is, there's adaptive management? No? Good? People are basically good with that? Okay. The last section is the commitment of the group. And by this section, what I really wanted to do was clarify, what does it mean for you to sign off on this? Like, what does that mean you have to do? Right? 'Cause it's good to be clear on what you're committing to. So by committing to these principles, you are saying that you endorse them, you agree that these are the directions to go in, and as we move forward to try to implement this, to further design the plan, to further refine and detail adaptive management, and the financial plan, that you're going to help support moving these things forward to the extent that they are consistent with the ideas and concepts in this agreement. Right? It also says that you commit to continuing to work together collaboratively to fix things that aren't working. That is, if a disagreement arises later about what it might mean to implement Principle X, right? The solution isn't to, form a campaign against it, but to come and sit down together, we do what we need to do collaboratively. We're going to keep working together to get this right. So that's really the nature of the commitment that you would be making. Any questions, thoughts about that?
Stacy, just
Yeah.
one edit. In 9, we refer to support warrants. Technically, there is a warrant for the town
Articles,
meeting.
right?
and-
I keep getting
and
those
We
confused.
support warrant articles.
You're not the only one.
Mr. Kelly has to sign the pay warrant every 2 weeks here, but,
That's not what you mean.
okay?
Nobody's being arrested either. We're not talking about those kind of warrants.
Not yet.
Jeff?
You might want to delete the word conceptual from paragraph 10. It appears 2 or 3 times.
Yeah.
It's a minor thing, but the first word "they," just make it very clear that it's the stakeholders again, perhaps.
Stakeholders.
Stakeholders.
Yeah. And, my intention is actually to list names
Yeah.
and organizations on behalf of,
Okay.
right? Because you are here as official representatives of your organizations. So,
You might want to put down organizations, not names, because people come and go.
well, I think we say names on behalf of.
Okay.
Right?
At this time.
At this time.
At this time.
Because we get elected every year.
I'll get to you in 1 second.
Or not.
We're not going to do that today, right?
Any other comments, anything else you think we've agreed to that isn't reflected here that would be important to include? Yes.
There's nothing really here about working with our neighboring towns regionally, and I think it's important that something
Great.
be added.
Yeah, and maybe that's its own number here within the key elements and plan approach. Good, I'll add that. Thanks. Anything else in the group? Okay, so I'm going to open this up for public comment. Was there someone else? No, I know, Denise.
But I don't get
I got that.
speak yet.
I just have to deal, I got to get the table first. So Mike had a request in order to talk about warrants. articles,
Articles.
warrant articles, that we, and an update on the financial, that we commit to staying till 1.
No, I can't,
Can't do it?
but others can. No, don't need me.
10 minutes. How about stay till 25 of? Okay. I want to take public comment, though, before we do that, just because I know there's been, people who have been interested to speak, and we really are on this critical topic of the agreement that is going to be made by all of you, but is going to hopefully be what helps influence support of the town as a whole. So, Ginnia.
Yeah, thanks. This is just a teeny thing. Number 10, second line, last word. Unexpected. I think when it's read by the town people, they could say, well, wait, why didn't you expect it? Does that mean you made a mistake? I would change that word to evolving. That we work collaboratively to address any evolving challenges. We know they're going to be there, but it's not because we made a mistake.
Yep. We like to call these the predictable surprises. It's like, obviously something's going to go wrong, right? Obviously there's going to be these challenges that come up. So, great, thanks.
I'm really glad that we're wordsmithing this, and that needs to be very, very clear and something that we can all agree to. However, I think when we go out to give our message to the public, there are not that many people who will be voting on the warrant articles that will be reading it in the detail that we are writing it. And I think that the map is really something that people will tend to look at, and that it should reflect what it is that we are agreeing to. My understanding, and Brian can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that it is now possible to submit targeted watershed plans to the regulators, and that doesn't necessarily have to include a town-wide plan. I think it is very positive that we have done the kinds of analyses that Thea has done to know that what we are moving forward with in our first plan submitted is a targeted plan, but we're informed by creating that targeted plan by all the other research that was done. So it's important that it was done. In terms of the map, I think that having the icons in the Pleasant Bay area as Plan B is very misleading. We did not put in Plan C, which would be the fallback position. So if you want to include things like that on the map, you might have the things that we're actually moving forward with in stark colors, and in very faded colors what some of the fallback positions that have been considered might be. Or simply to leave them off the map and let people see what we're moving forward with right now.
Yeah. So just to respond to that, as Mike said, we're not moving forward with any of it yet, right? Because all of it involves uncertainty. We don't have an effluent site, disposal site, right? We don't have, so
I would say
there are levels of how certain they are, but I think your point, if I can take your point, which is how do we make sure that what people look at on the map and what they see is where we really are, right? And let me and Sia give that a little bit more thought and come back to you on some suggestions about how we might do that. I personally am very reluctant to take all those symbols off, partly because what we're really trying to show here is this is going to meet water quality standards, right? This is going to meet requirements. It's going to do all those things. And if you show half of it empty,
then fade them.
That's okay. So we'll think about ideas about how we might do it, while also conveying the message that the group is committed to Plan A. This might be Plan A, Plan B, Plan C, Plan D, or however deep we have to go. At the bottom, as Brian said, maybe the CWMP, right? And eventually getting us to meeting our obligations, but we're going to, we have given this some thought, and it is going to meet standards, right? So that's the idea. You have more?
I have one more comment.
Okay.
Separate, different topic. The remark that Jeff made about water quality being paramount, and of course it is. I would also, however, point out that we are in a regulatory environment, and the regulatory environment is dictating what our actions are now. There are many things that we could possibly do in addition that may have to do with water quality, and it is important, but that isn't what we're talking about when we're talking about presenting the plan to the regulators.
Well, again, I want to say I think that's true, but I think it's also true that to members of this group, phosphorus has been extremely important, even though that's not being officially regulated, and it is part of the plan. So there are other things, right, about water quality that are important to people, and the group has said that overall ecosystem restoration is really important. It's in here as an objective, and it is integrated into this plan. So I think, yeah.
To echo what Fran has said, the original document that we're working on is in response to a suggestion Jeff made last meeting of a 2-page summary of what we have agreed on. I cannot stress how strongly I feel. We have not agreed on all those detail icons, and I really think we have to have a plan that supports the one that we have agreed on, and I think we also have to address the requirement that Brian has been specific about a backup plan. So I think you're going to, bottom line, if we have every one of these things is in somebody's backyard, in somebody's pond, you have the potential, or we have the potential of reaching a situation where we cannot agree to support the level of commitment you want at the end because we don't feel we've done that analysis. And more importantly, we're going to lose votes because somebody's going to say, oh, they're showing a PRB here or a floating vegetated wetlands here. And we just simply have not reached consensus on those items. And I think we have to have a plan, a document that supports what we have reached consensus on.
Okay, I bring that back up to the group. Oh, one more public comment.
I'd like to point out that Town Cove in its history has never been closed for poor quality, for shellfishing, for any reason at all. It's been closed for red tide, but never poor quality. And this goes back beyond Title V's. The gentleman that mentioned the 1950 meetings about starting up how to deal with it. Prior to that, never been closed off. What has been occurring all those times, though, is back in the 40s they were maintaining the estuary, mostly for commerce, bringing schooners up into the cove. But that produced good shellfish and good water quality. They had eelgrass. They had all these things that you are all trying to devise out of some imagined, I don't know what you call them, non-traditionals, that, none of this stuff was needed at the time. It just was good water management by using the estuary as it is. Now, one of the problems I'm having with this is this constant pounding of nitrogen loading, nitrates, shellfish that are going to take, nitrates out of the, out of the system. You have 9 aquaculture grants in the Town Cove estuary, all the way up to Fort Hill. They've been growing oysters for 25 years. They've got hundreds of thousands of dollars invested into that. And we're now getting the impression that there's nitrates in these oysters. Not good policy. Another thing, you got a wild shell fishery. State is monitoring all the waters in the state. And they know where the shellfish are coming from. We do not want a situation where you have shellfish now being known as coming out of Town Cove that has been nitrogen loading. Another example, you're selling hundreds and hundreds of licenses in town for people to go shellfishing. You have a family shellfish area at the head of Town Cove right in front of the yacht club. Do you want these people to come in and say, should I be harvesting any of my shellfish out of Town Cove? Where can I go elsewhere? This thing of nitrogen loading is overplayed. That's my opinion. And I think nitrogen loaders That's their opinion. Now, one misconception I've been getting over the last few weeks, and if I could just pass these around, is this idea that, I'm out, this Nauset Inlet, changing Nauset Inlet and how to deal with Nauset Inlet. I'm speaking of specifically the estuary. The estuary is where your blockage is, not at the inlet. The inlet is a leviathan. I've gone through that. You cannot change it. Where it is all my point. You just want to focus how to get the water out of Town Cove to the inlet, and you're going to get better water quality. So this is just, right there at the front. I wish I had more time. I know I don't. But you're going to see on the first pages some markers, some arrows pointing out where you have hang-ups, these bankings that are occurred that are preventing water from discharging from Town Cove. And you deal with those, you're going to get something better. You want flowers, you got to prepare a flower bed. And that's essentially, my point.
Thank you.
Just and follow up in terms of what should be on the map. My impression is that this is what we're agreeing to. This is a concept. The map as structured is the concept. And I think if anything is taken off, then that takes us away from the overall concept as to what this group is. So my own thought is that either you have the whole concept, because that's what you're really conveying, or you don't have any map at all. Because we're not agreeing to just a piece, or we're not consensus a piece. It is the whole concept.
So any more comments on that? I'm going to, as I said, I'm going to play with that idea. I hear it's really important. It's important in lots of ways. So I think I have the core principles here of what people care about regarding the map and its clarity about what it is, what it's not. And I'm going to see what I can figure out. Did you have one more thing you wanted to say about that, Jim?
Well, yeah, if we take the icons off, we have to do it in such a way that it doesn't look like Phase 1A.
No, don't take them off.
Okay?
But going back to the statement by the chairman of the Board of Selectmen, and I agree with it, the icons are an integral part of the conceptual plan. They are an integral part of meeting the TMDLs. Without them, it's not responsive. We show a responsive plan, or we don't show the picture. It's black or white. Or we develop another responsive plan, but we have to show a responsive plan. Otherwise, the gentleman to my right is not going to have anything to do with it.
Got it. Okay.
I agree. I wouldn't take the icons off. Just maybe put another legend. Just clarifies briefly what is more certain and less certain.
Yeah.
Would it help to try to identify the preliminary demonstration sites?
Yes. Yes.
Well, wait a minute.
Or how about candidate sites?
Candidate.
Right.
Wait a minute.
Candidate demonstration sites.
Higher priority. We have to do the site selection process. That's a really important process that was talked about. But we could certainly, I could certainly give you that, a 10 or something.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll think more about that. Last comment on this, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we should put, our guesses of what the sites are going to be. I think we should leave it into the site selection process. We said we're going to do that. Let's leave it. We've got a concept up there of where things are going to go, how big they're going to be. That's fine. That's enough for now. I mean, go and do it in more detail that we don't have the information to create the detail. Where's the gain in that?
Well, and particularly if then we really need to have the discussion so everyone feels like they're ready to agree that those are the candidate sites. Do we have that? So, all right, let us play with that. We'll come back to you with something, hopefully, that addresses those concerns. Before you go,
That's known as adaptive management.
how many notes?
Proposal and then story. I suggest we do the warrant articles next meeting. We'll put it up front. There's a handout, I think, passed around already that you have. Read through it. For once, we actually got it to you 2 weeks ahead of time. Same thing with the financial. Read through the financial. There's a lot in there. Doug Gardner has been working on it hard. It's a big step forward. It wasn't ready to be handed out last week, but we said, you know, we could hold it back from you and not give it to you and wait until next Wednesday. But so now you got it. Read through it, and we'll have a good discussion about that next time. And then finally, the last little bit of debate reminded me of a story of the college student who went into his dissertation advisor, or he had a class, he did a final exams. And he got his final exam back, and there was no grade on it. And so he flipped through each page, and no comments anywhere. Last page, note from the professor, is this the best you can do? So he looked, he realized, you know, it really wasn't. He slipped through the last night, so he gets back, works another week on it, hands it in again. Same thing, no grade, no comments. Is this the best you can do? And he realized he could still do better. So he went back and really went after it this time, did what he thought was a great job, submitted it again, same response. No grade, no comments. Is this the best you can do? So he makes an appointment with his professor and goes in and says, okay, sir, he says, what's the deal here? You know, 3 times, same thing. And the professor looks at him and says, is that the best you can do? And the kid says, well, yeah, it is. And the professor says, okay, now I'll read it. We're doing the best we can do. So read it.
Read it.
Thanks.
All right,
All
I
set.
want to thank everybody for a great meeting, and we'll see you in 2 months.
Want a motion to adjourn?
To adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Thank you.